Hello, this is Christian Idealism, and today I'm going to be doing just kind of a short announcement video on just updating what's going on with this channel. So obviously, I'm not off YouTube completely. I haven't been posting because I've been busy with research. Well, research and also just college. Like I'm a college student, right? So I don't have time to make YouTube content as much as I used to. But I am here to kind of give an update on the big series of this channel, the big one that kind of has been driving this channel for the past year and a half, and that is the Swinburne series. Um, because it's been almost a year now since my last video of the Swinburne series. So, you know, um, my last video on this subject was called "The Explanatory Flexibility of Theism." I released it back in March of last year. And so ever since then, as you can tell, I haven't posted anything in regards to the Swinburne series. I've done, other videos related to the topic, but I haven't done like a formal video like that's part of the series specifically. Um, and that's because my methodology has, of course, changed. So I'm going to kind of go over today what that looks like and where exactly am I changing my strategy? So the first thing is that a lot of the stuff that I said in those videos and the earlier videos, I still hold to them. So especially the very first video I did, which is revolutionizing apologetics. That video um, has been kind of like sort of like the blueprint, so to speak, of this. However, as I kept doing my research, I realized that there's actually a lot more that goes into it than I initially thought, especially in regards to how exactly Swinburne himself looks at this and also kind of new discoveries as well. So, for example, I recently did a video on a new framework for understanding how theism works as an explanation. And that framework is sort of an updated version of it's kind of the outgrowing of my previous research into this topic. Because when I initially started, I kind of just said, yeah, theism makes predictions based on value, but we can't really say what those exactly look like. Whereas the framework that I have now, the framework that me and Tim have developed, actually does identify what those can be. And we also have like kind of new ways to look at this. One of the considerations is that me and Tim have adopted a new Bayesian framework for understanding like just how evidence works in the first place. What's the structure of epistemology, like the structure of epistemic probabilities. And so because of that, then I've had to really push back my video, at least another formal video. And as I kept on writing the script for my new cumulative case for theism, I realized that I'm not going to be able to put this like in a like if I were to do a video on my case for theism, it would be like 4 hours. And I don't have the time to make a 4 hour video. I just can't do it. I mean, the best I could do probably is like some presentation, like kind of what's with like for example, like what Suan Sona did on his Eliakim argument. I'm sure if you're all aware of that. If you're all aware of Suan Sona of intellectual, previously he was intellectual conservatism, now he's intellectual Catholicism. But he did a 4 hour video. It's kind of just a presentation. For me, I'm not going to do that on this channel. I think that's way too much. And I'm also not gonna do a 4 hour, like, formal video, right? Which means that the Swinburne series is kind of at a halt because my next video for the Swinburne series is not gonna be a super duper long video. Like, it's not gonna be something that I can just, um that's gonna, like, kinda close things off. No, it's gonna be, um we're gonna be stepping back and starting from the beginning. So we're gonna kind of like, okay, where did we go wrong? And I'll go over here some of the things um that I that I initially thought worked as arguments, but I don't think they work anymore. So there is kind of like a concession on my research, but I think at the end of this video, I think you'll all agree with me that these aren't really a problem for the overall case. This isn't. I'm not here to like refute my own arguments, right? I'm just, I'm just kind of like trying to say, okay, where did I go wrong and how can I improve? And that's kind of what I'm going to be doing here in this video, and also just to keep in mind exactly where I move forward from here. So let's start off um, from the beginning. So one of my first videos I did on the Swinburne series was my defining God video, and that was just kind of like laying out my case, like laying out my model of theism, laying out exactly how do we define God in the first place? How do we understand what God is? So there, I would say that my definitions were fairly accurate, and I wouldn't really change much in the video. The only thing I would change it would actually be God's fundamental properties. So at the time when I made that video, I made the claim that God is just identical to a property of absolute perfection. And over the years, or over the past year and a half or so, I've actually changed my position on that. So I've changed my position to God is just pure omnipotence, or specifically an omnipotence trope. And because I have to change my views on that, I can't really say that God is identical to absolute perfection, but rather you could say God is identical to absolute power, or just let's just call it like God is identical to a maximally simple omnipotence trope. And from this omnipotence trope, you get all the other divine attributes that people talk about, right? So because of that, my model theism is different now than it was at the time, and that's fine because I can still use the same arguments, right? It's not like it's not like any of the actual evidence I presented for theism goes away. It's just that the framework for understanding this evidence changed, right? And that's um, kind of like the update, so to speak. So that's the first thing: is my understanding of what God is just different now than it was when I first started the series. And then also, another important consideration, this is a more methodological consideration, is that my understanding of background knowledge has also changed. So when I first initially started, I kind of dismissed background knowledge as a criteria that we should use. In fact, I argued against background knowledge being a criteria. Um, I've changed my position now. So I do think that background knowledge is a good criteria you should use for assessing metaphysical theories. But the background knowledge is going to be, again, it's going to depend upon which metaphysical framework you're operated on, right? And so because of that, I wouldn't say, I think my understanding of background knowledge is going to be more in the metaphysical context rather than like what we experience every day, right? So that's another important consideration, that when we're talking about background knowledge, we have to be more careful in regards to what exactly we mean. So, for example, we could say, well, if we're going to posit God as a spirit, like we don't posit spirits in metaphysics or science, right? However, for tropes, it's a little bit different because we do posit tropes in metaphysics and in certain cases in scientific practice. So, specifically physics, right? Um, if you want more research on that, I recommend just seeing like trope theoretic accounts of quantum field theory for more information on that. But the point here is that understanding God as a trope, um, I think, is more helpful than understanding God as a spirit. Also, it's better than understanding God as just like this property of absolute perfection, right? So because of that, then I do think that background knowledge should be used as criteria, and in that case, I do agree with some of the criticisms that atheists have proposed against Swinburne, right? So one of the main objections to Swinburne's case for theism is that Swinburne just completely like doesn't take into account background knowledge, right? And I would agree with it. I would agree with the atheists or the skeptics here um, that yeah, if we're gonna just dismiss background knowledge, if we're not gonna consider it, then it's gonna be really hard to see where exactly does theism derive its predictions from. Like what background theory, what background assumptions are we using to like get these predictions? And so in that case, then I agree with the naturalist that we should use background knowledge when it comes to theism. But of course, I would just say that that's not a problem for atheists like myself because I view God as a trope. Because I view God as a trope, it's not going to really be an issue for my kind of theism. Um, so that's kind of the first thing I want to mention. The second thing is in regards to simplicity. So I think that Swinburne is actually at least the way that he framed the argument originally, I think that there's more considerations in regards to like whether simplicity should be used as a criteria for judging the probability of theories. So, for example, Swinburne requires the overall simplicity of a theory to be equal to the content of the theory. And Swinburne also wants to derive, at least a priori, that simplicity is evidence for truth, right? But there are a few considerations that I think challenge this. So, for example, we know at least a few cases when we get from, like, for example, from Einstein's or Newton's theory to Einstein's theory, where we can say that the latter theory is actually overall more complex. Like Einstein's theory is actually more complex in certain aspects than Newton's theory. But obviously, I think we can agree that there's a higher probability to Einstein's theory than there is to Newton's theory. Um, right? We can say that Newton's theory is just a subset of Einstein's theory. Um, and so, like, the more probable. So in this case, we could say, well, the more probable hypothesis is actually going to be the hypothesis that's overall less simple, right? Um, and so I think this counts against so at least Swinburne's use of simplicity. Now I have more to say on simplicity in a moment, but I will say that there are some challenges to Swinburne's own arguments in regards to whether theism actually is a simpler theory and whether theism is actually more intrinsically probable than naturalism in regards to simplicity. Now, why do I mention this? Well, I mention it because one of my main arguments in one of my first videos, I made a case for why theism is more intrinsically probable than naturalism. But what I realized later on is, as I did my research, I realized that, well, actually, it really depends upon the Bayesian framework you're using. So, for example, if you take an orthodox view of Bayesianism, where the prior probabilities of hypotheses are going to be determined by, I think it's, oh, sorry, the intrinsic probability of hypotheses are going to be determined by the unconditional probabilities of complete worlds. Then, of course, the claim or the theory that has the most number of claims is going to be the less simple one, right? And so it's going to have a less intrinsic probability. So the theory that has more simplicity and less claims, right, is going to have more intrinsic probability. This is how Draper argues. This is how I know Graham Oppie argues, right? So because of that, I actually do agree with those criticisms. However, I would say that that is assuming an orthodox view of Bayesian epistemology. If we take a explanations view of Bayesian epistemology, we're going to have to kind of filter out those kind of arguments. And so then on explanationism, the simplest theory is actually not always the most plausible. So it could be the most plausible, right? But it has to be filtered through the explanationist framework, right? If you want more information on explanationism or the debates between explanationists and orthodox Bayesianisms, see my video on the explanatory power of theism. I think it's one of the first few slides, I believe. I talk about the main distinctions. If you want more details on exactly how those kind of two views are defined. So now let's get into my third consideration, and that is the understated evidence objection. So I actually do think that understated evidence is a challenge to a kind of Swinburne style argument, which is why I think that you need to update, or at least if you want to present a Swinburne style case for theism, you are going to need to seriously provide a good response to Draper's objection there. So, of course, I myself and me and Tim Howard have developed sort of four different strategies of responding to the understated evidence objection, and I also have more on that will be coming on the way as I make more videos. But if you want to see at least the four main ways of responding to the understated evidence objection, again, see my presentation on the explanatory power of theism, a novel framework, and it's kind of like one of the last objections that we addressed in that video. Again, I'm not going to go over my response to that objection here. I'm going to reference people to that video specifically. So, where does this lead us? Well, it leads us to a point where um, there's a few considerations. Number one, given what I said in the beginning, I'm not going to be able to do a full blown like case for theism in one like video, right? I'm not going to make a 4-hour video or even a 3-hour video or even a 2-hour video. I'm just not going to do it. So because of that, I have to break it up into sections. And so because of that, what I'm going to do, and I've been thinking about this more, but I've made a decision. I am going to basically restart from the beginning. So, what does that mean? Well, it means I'm going to start off with methodology, understanding how does abduction work, how does, how do we view evidence in the first place? Then I'm going to get into how theism operates as a hypothesis specifically. I've kind of already done that here. If you want kind of a blueprint of how what that would look like, again, see my video on the explanatory power of theism and novel framework for more details on that. But I'm gonna kind of give kind of the same thing, just you know, kind of condensing it all, just to kind of see like how does theism work as an explanation? How does my kind of theism work as an explanation? And then most of the I'm gonna have a few videos on the evidence for theism specifically. And I'll be responding to, of course, some objections. I'll respond to the understated evidence objection. I'll be responding to nationalistic parodies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to be responding to like the best atheist literature I can on the subject, and I'll try to be as fair as I can and make sure I try not to miss anything. If I do miss anything, let me know. Then I'm going to go into responding to theistic anomalies, so responding to the power of evil, divine hiddenness, figuring out, okay, well, how should we address this sort of thing? Then I'm going to get into considerations regarding the weighted average principle as well. So that'll be coming up as well in the future videos. And then finally, I'm just going to be giving an overall summary of my case, probably. So this is kind of like the outline of my video series. So let me look at my notes real quick, so that people can understand exactly. In case you forgot what I just went over, I'm going to see if I can find them. Where is it? Perfect. So this is the outline for these next few videos that are going to be coming out. Number 1, theism and method, which is the structure of epicenter probability. Number 2, theism and background knowledge, which is kind of presenting what is the higher order of theory of theism and what kind of background knowledge are we using when addressing this. Number 3, when we complete a cumulative case for theism's simplicity, and I'll be arguing that theism is more intrinsically probable than naturalism and is also more simpler than naturalism. I'll get more into that later, but that's going to be video number 3. Video number 4 is theism and axiology, which is how theism operates, or how does theism generate its predictions. I've kind of over if you want kind of like a full layout of what that's going to look like, again, see my video on the explanatory power of theism and novel framework. But that I'm going to be going just basically giving a condensed version of that. Then I'm going to be getting into the 5th video on the series is going to be theism and its rivals, making a theistic case. And here I'm going to be kind of presenting like the case for theism that I have, kind of updating old arguments, bringing in new arguments. Um, and that's going to be a really long one, so I'm probably going to have to break it up into different videos. We'll see on what happens there, but that's kind of the outline. Then number 6, theism and its rivals, a critique of naturalistic cumulative cases. So this is going to be responding to Paul Draper, Graham Oppie, Gregory Dawes, and like basically any cumulative case that's in the literature. I'm going to be responding to it thoroughly and showing why either they don't work or why at least the case for theism that I built kind of overturns it, at least overturns their probability assessments. Then number 7, or part 7, because I don't know how many videos these are going to be. This might end up being 30 videos. We'll see. So part 7 of this is going to be theism and anomalies, completed a response to theistic anomalies. So I'm not going to focus too much on the problem of evil here because I've already done a full 2.5 hour video on it. But I will be kind of giving my brief like updated thoughts on the problem of evil, and then also updated thoughts on divine hiddenness, and then of course responding to like arguments like the argument from scale, the argument from imperfections, and so on and so forth. Then finally, number 8, or part 8 of my series, is going to be theism and its in total probability, which is where I basically just complete a cumulative case for theism and kind of put it all together. I don't know how long that's going to be. I'm going to try to like put it all in one video so people can just go back and watch. But that is the plan for the Swinburne series. And hopefully by the time I'm done with this, that will be kind of the end of the Swinburne series. At least the end of phase 1. So what does that mean? Well, it's not the end of Swinburne series, but it is the end of my kind of theistic case. At least not the absolute theistic case, but kind of a respectable version of a theistic case. So just kind of presenting like a pretty good case for theism. So that's phase one, which is basically just establishing that God exists. Yeah, yeah. Swinburne is. Let's just say that what I just mentioned here, that's only phase one, and that's kind of my area of research for the most part. And then phase two is going to be arguing that that God would become incarnate, or at least there's a high probability that God would become incarnate. And those are going to be future videos. I don't know when those are going to happen. I don't have a set time for those. So that's going to happen like way in the future. And that'll be phase two. And then finally, just phase three is going to be, if I can get to this, it'll probably be like the resurrection of Jesus specifically. I don't know if I'm going to get into that in a formal context just because of the fact that, well, let's just say that that's not my area of research. So I study the philosophy of religion. I don't study historical methodology or anything like that. So unfortunately, I'm probably not going to do any formal videos on those, but we'll see what happens. Maybe I can try to figure out what's going to happen. So, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you now understand where this channel is going, and I hope that both theists and atheists on both sides can kind of um, understand like where Swinburne is coming from, and so on and so forth. So, anyways, thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching, and have a nice day.